Section 1. The Infinite Hallway. You regret everything, not always out loud, not always consciously. That deep down beneath the surface smiles and the routines and the casual, I'm doing just fine. Something aches. It's not that your life has gone terribly wrong. It's that it could have gone differently. You replay the job you turned down, the city you never moved to, the person you never called back, the version of yourself that almost existed, but didn't. And you can't quite let it go. Even on good days, there's a kind of phantom pain, like a limb that never grew. You scroll past someone else's life and wonder if it's the one you should be living. You lie in bed wondering if you made a wrong turn 5 years ago. You feel like you're standing in a hallway with 1,000 open doors, but every time you move, another one closes behind you. And that is terrifying. This isn't an ordinary regret. It's not just wishing you had made better choices. It's being haunted by all the choices you never made. And that is exactly what the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard warned us about. Kierkegaard was born in 1813 in Copenhagen and died in 1855, only 42 years old. Yet in his short life, he laid the groundwork for what we now call existentialism, a philosophy not of abstract theories, but of lived anguish. He didn't write about logic puzzles. He wrote about dread, about despair, about the pain of becoming a self in a world that refuses to tell you who to be. And Kierkegaard's most chilling insight: anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. The concept of anxiety, 1844, to not the joy of freedom, not the thrill of possibility, the dizziness of it. You weren't built for a world of infinite choices, and yet here you are, living in a culture that celebrates possibility, romanticizes potential, and tells you that you can be anything. But what if that's the very reason you feel like nothing? What if your regret isn't a sign that something went wrong, but a symptom of having too many lives available and only one life to live? You were told to keep your options open, but no one told you the cost. You feel paralyzed by decisions. You delay commitment not because you're lazy, but because you're terrified of choosing wrong. You dip your toe into relationships, jobs, identities, always testing, rarely trusting. And slowly you forget what it feels like to jump in with both feet. You thought keeping doors open would make you free. But now you're stuck in the hallway, looking at all the doors, wondering what's behind them, and missing the only one that's real. Kierkegaard saw it coming. In a world obsessed with potential, he knew that people would suffer not from lack of freedom, but from too much of it. To be able to choose is a blessing. To be forced to choose is a curse, but to refuse to choose is despair. You're not in pain because you failed. You're in pain because you hesitated. You're not drowning in consequences. You're drowning in possibility. This is the paradox Kierkegaard diagnosed more than 170 years ago. And it's even more relevant now. Because today, you don't just live one life, you see thousands. You see influencers traveling to Greece. You see friends starting families. You see strangers writing books, launching startups, buying cabins in the woods, falling in love in coffee shops, and each one becomes another version of who you could have been. And you feel like your own life is shrinking. Not because it's worse, but because it's one. Just one. That's the hidden grief of the modern world. You were told you could be everything, and now you feel like you're not enough. But what if the problem isn't your life? What if the problem is the expectation to live every life at once? That's where Kierkegaard begins, and it's where your liberation starts. Because regret is not a punishment. It's a signal that you are a human being, that you are awake, that you are standing on the edge of your freedom, terrified to step forward, but aware that you must. The real tragedy isn't choosing wrong. The real tragedy is never choosing at all. Section 2. The mirror of the unlived self. You look at your life, and then you look again. But the second time, it's through a mirror made of what is. You see not just who you are, but who you could have been. And that reflection stings. You wonder what might have happened if you'd studied something else. If you'd stayed. If you'd laughed sooner. If you'd taken the risk. If you'd kept your mouth shut. If you'd spoken up. You don't just live your life, you measure it against 1,000 ghost versions of it. And each of those versions feels more vivid the longer you stare. Kierkegaard understood this too. He believed the self wasn't a static thing, it was something you had to become. But you couldn't become anything unless you chose. And in his foundational work, Either Slash or published in 1843, he wrote about the agony of trying to live two lives at once. You can't be the artist and the accountant. You can't marry them and also stay single. You can't start over in a new city and remain rooted in your childhood town. You have to choose, and choosing always means losing. That's what no one tells you about freedom. It's not just possibility. It's sacrifice. Kierkegaard said, to choose is to commit, and to commit is to exclude. You cannot live every life. You cannot be every person. And every choice you make sends a ripple of unchosen lives into the shadows. Those shadows are what you're feeling when regret hits you hardest. You are not broken. You are aware. But awareness without action becomes paralysis. And paralysis becomes despair. That's the risk Kierkegaard warned us about. You think you're staying open, but really, you're standing still. And the self doesn't grow in indecision, it robs. This is why he calls it despair. Not because your life is meaningless, but because meaning requires limits. It requires a narrowing of focus, a commitment to a particular form of existence, to love one person, to pursue one path, to accept the death of all the others. That's not failure, that's maturity. Even modern psychologists echo this. Barry Schwartz, in his book, The Paradox of Choice, describes how more options often lead to more anxiety, not more satisfaction. And Carl Jung famously said that the greatest burden a child can bear is the unlived life of a parent, because unlived lives don't just disappear. They echo. They haunt. So ask yourself, how many of your regrets are about the past hour? And how many are really about your reflection? How many are rooted in real loss, and how many are rooted in fantasy? You regret the life you didn't live, but would you even be the same person if you had? Would that job, that city, that relationship have turned out the way you imagine? Or is it just an idea you've made beautiful because you never had to suffer through its reality? Regret is real, but not all regret is truthful. Sometimes it's nostalgia for a version of you that never existed. Sometimes it's guilt for not being multiple people at once. Sometimes it's the ego, mourning the death of potential rather than celebrating the birth of identity. Because when you choose, really choose, you kill off the illusion that you could have had it all. And that feels like grief, but it's also how you become whole. Kierkegaard said, the self becomes itself only by choosing, and he meant it. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not too late. You're just someone who's finally realizing that the unlived self is not your enemy, it's your mirror. It shows you what matters, not because you can have it all, but because you're finally ready to choose what you want most. Section 3. The courage to choose. You keep waiting for clarity, for a sign, for enough certainty to guarantee that if you leap, you'll land somewhere soft, but it never comes, so you wait. And the longer you wait, the heavier the choice becomes. This is the quiet torment of the modern self. You believe that the longer you delay, the wiser you'll be. But really, you're feeding the fear, because you've mistaken hesitation for wisdom. And what you need is courage. but not the kind of courage you've been sold in movies and war stories. You don't need to slay dragons. You don't need to conquer worlds. You need the courage to pick a door and walk through it. This is the kind of courage Søren Kierkegaard called the leap of faith, and it has nothing to do with religious dogma or blind obedience. It has everything to do with the human experience of choosing in the absence of certainty. Kierkegaard believed that the moment of choice is not logical. It's not even fully rational. It is existential. It is a confrontation between your infinite potential and your finite life. And you must choose, even if your hands shake, even if your voice cracks, even if fear clings to you like a second skin. Because not choosing is still a choice. It's the choice to stay asleep. That's why Kierkegaard didn't pity the doubter. He pitied the person who refused to leap because that person had mistaken safety for meaning. To choose is to commit, and to commit is to suffer. But not to choose is despair, either/or. 1843, you've been told to fear the wrong thing. You've been told to fear regret, to fear failure, to fear missing out. But you should fear this instead. The quiet numbness of a life lived on pause. The erosion of your identity as you try to please every possibility. The spiritual death that comes from being too careful to be real. The philosopher Martin Heidegger, deeply influenced by Kierkegaard, wrote in 1927 that human beings are beings toward death. What he meant was that meaning doesn't arise despite our limitations, but because of them. Your life only matters because it's finite. Because every choice you make echoes across a limited number of days. And because choosing is the only way to give form to your existence. So yes, it's scary. But ask yourself, what would you do if you stopped waiting for certainty? What would you become if you stopped needing a guarantee? Who would you be if you stopped waiting for permission? Because you will never become who you are supposed to be while trying to keep every version of yourself alive. You must choose. You must leap. You must let go of the illusion of having it all and embrace the power of becoming one thing deeply. And if it hurts, good. That means it's real. The pain is the sign that you're no longer skimming the surface of your life. You're finally living in it. Kierkegaard didn't offer comfort. He offered clarity. And in a world addicted to delay, that clarity is a form of rebellion. Section 4. The beauty of regret. Regret doesn't disappear. Not even when you choose. Not even when you grow. Not even when you heal. But that doesn't mean it's your enemy. Regret is proof that you're alive enough to care. It's a scar, not a failure. It's the emotional shadow of possibility. And shadows only exist where there is light. Søren Kierkegaard didn't teach that regret should be avoided. He taught that it should be understood. Because when you regret deeply, you are often not mourning the wrong decision. You are mourning the loss of an illusion that you could have lived all your lives at once. That you could have been everyone, but you couldn't. And you weren't supposed to. That ache in your chest, it's not emptiness. It's grief. The noble grief of becoming someone, and therefore not becoming everyone else. And this is where regret becomes beautiful. Because it means you took the risk of caring. You dared to want. You tried. You lived with your eyes open. Regret is the smoke that rises from the fire of meaningful living. The psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and wrote Man's Search for Meaning in 1946, said it best. In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. This is the final step Kierkegaard offers, not erasing regret, but redeeming it. Turning it from a weight into a witness. Not a curse, but a companion. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who admired Kierkegaard but took a more tragic tone, spoke of the idea of amor fati, the love of one's fate. not just acceptance of the past, but embrace. This is what it means to live authentically. To carry your regrets, not as chains, but as chapters. To remember your past, not to torment yourself, but to honor it. To grieve the unlived lives without abandoning the one you're still in. Because this life, the one you're living right now, is still happening, and it's still yours. So many people waste their days rehearsing sorrow, practicing pain, rerunning the lives they didn't choose instead of building the one they did. But what if you stopped? What if you saw regret not as a signal to turn back, but as a sign that you're on the edge of becoming whole? Kierkegaard believed that despair was not the end, it was the beginning, because despair, when understood, becomes fuel. It wakes you up. It burns off the illusion. It leaves only the truth. You are here. You are alive. You have not lived every life, but you are still living this one, and that is more than enough. So grieve what you lost. Grieve who you didn't become. Grieve the road not taken, the words not said, the versions of you that never got a chance to breathe. But after you grieve, return. Return to your body. Return to your values. Return to the path you are actually walking, and walk it with courage. You don't need to fix the past. You need to stand in the present with enough clarity to say, yes, I chose. Yes, I lost something. Yes, I hurt. But I am here, and I am real. That is what Kierkegaard offers us. Not the absence of suffering, but a meaning deep enough to carry it. So the next time you feel regret crawling up your spine, whisper to it, I see you. You mean I cared. You mean I lived. You mean I'm still becoming.